Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun stood at the entrance of the Naval Special Warfare Command briefing room, her dress blue uniform pressed to perfection. At 5 feet 4 inches, she barely reached the shoulders of most of the men filing past her into the room. The gold surface warfare officer pin and Navy Cross ribbon on her chest caught the fluorescent light, but the dozen special operations candidates streaming into the briefing hardly noticed. "Excuse me, miss," said a tall ensign with perfectly styled blonde hair, his tone dripping with condescension. "This briefing is for SEAL candidates only. The administrative offices are down the hall." Sarah's dark eyes remained steady as she looked up at him. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The ensign's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Look, I'm sure you're very good at whatever paperwork you handle, but this is serious business. We're about to get briefed on our final training exercise before Hell Week. Maybe you could fetch us some coffee while we wait for the real instructor?" 3 other candidates had stopped to watch the exchange, their expressions ranging from amused to uncomfortable. One of them, a burly petty officer with arms like tree trunks, stepped forward with a smirk. "Come on, Bradley," he said to the ensign. "Can't you see she's probably just some Pentagon princess who got lost looking for the gift shop? What's your rank anyway, sweetheart?" "Let me guess, Lieutenant Junior grade? Maybe ensign yourself." Sarah's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her voice remained calm and professional. "My rank is clearly displayed on my uniform, petty officer." The burly sailor squinted at her shoulder boards, his face scrunching in confusion. "Those look like commander stripes, but that can't be right. You're what, 25? Daddy must have some serious connections to buy you those pretty ribbons." "Actually," Bradley chimed in, "I bet she's not even Navy. Probably some civilian contractor wearing a costume. Real officers don't look like high school students." The small crowd of candidates had grown larger, drawn by the commotion. Sarah counted at least 15 men, now forming a loose circle around her, their expressions ranging from skeptical amusement to outright hostility. She had faced this kind of treatment before, too many times to count, but it never got easier. "I'm going to ask you one more time to move along," said a third candidate, this one sporting the confident swagger of someone who had never been told no. "This briefing is classified, and you clearly don't have the clearance or the rank to be here." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out her identification card, holding it up so they could see her photograph next to the unmistakable gold commander's insignia. "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, Naval Special Warfare Command. Serial number 442-5789. I do indeed have the appropriate clearance." Bradley snatched the ID from her hand, studying it with theatrical intensity. "This has got to be fake. There's no way someone who looks like she should be asking if I want fries with my order outranks half the people in this room." "Give me that," the burly petty officer demanded, grabbing the ID. Chun. Never heard of any Commander Chun in Special Warfare. And look at this picture. She looks like she's 12 years old." Sarah's patience was wearing thin, but she maintained her composure. 20 years of military service had taught her that losing her temper would only validate their assumptions. Instead, she stood straighter and spoke in the clear, authoritative tone she had perfected during countless command briefings. "Gentlemen, I understand your confusion, but I can assure you that my credentials are legitimate. Now, if you would kindly take your seats, we can begin the briefing." The laughter that erupted from the group was loud enough to echo off the walls. Bradley wiped tears from his eyes as he handed her ID back with exaggerated ceremony. "Oh, this is rich. She thinks she's going to brief us. What's next? Are you going to tell us you're a Navy SEAL too? Maybe you'll teach us how to do our makeup before a mission." "I bet she got lost on her way to the Navy Nurse Corps," added another voice from the back of the group. "Those medical officers always think they're hot stuff because they went to college." Sarah pocketed her ID and walked to the front of the room, positioning herself behind the podium. The candidates continued their mockery, but she ignored them and began setting up her laptop and connecting it to the projection system. "This is actually hilarious," Bradley announced to his audience. "She's really going to try to pretend she belongs here. What do you think, guys? Should we play along with the little girl's fantasy? I give her 5 minutes before she starts crying and runs back to whatever desk job she escaped from," predicted the burly petty officer. "These wannabes always crack under pressure." Sarah finished her setup and turned to face the room, her hands clasped behind her back in the at-ease position. Despite the continued snickering and whispered comments, she began speaking in a clear, professional voice. Good morning. Today we will be reviewing the parameters and objectives for your final training exercise before Hell Week commences. This exercise will test every skill you have developed over the past 6 months of training. Excuse me, ma'am, Bradley interrupted with mock politeness, but I think there's been some kind of mistake. We're waiting for our actual instructor. You know, someone who has actually completed SEAL training? Someone who has real combat experience instead of just playing dress-up. The room erupted in laughter again, and several candidates began making exaggerated gestures of looking around the room as if searching for their real instructor. Sarah waited for the noise to die down before continuing. The exercise will take place over 72 hours in a simulated urban warfare environment. You will be divided into 4-man teams and tasked with infiltrating, gathering intelligence, and exfiltrating while avoiding opposing forces. This is getting boring, complained one of the candidates from the middle of the room. When is someone with actual authority going to show up? I didn't spend 6 months preparing for SEAL training to get lectured by some lost lieutenant who probably can't even do a push-up. I bet she's never even seen combat, added another voice. Look at her. Probably spent her whole career in some air-conditioned office pushing papers and attending diversity seminars. Sarah's eyes found the speaker, a lean candidate with the cocky expression of someone who had never faced real adversity. What's your name, candidate? Petty Officer Second Class Martinez, he replied with a sneer. And, before you ask, yes, I have actually seen real action. 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Real war, not whatever PowerPoint battle you've been fighting. 3 deployments, Sarah repeated, her tone neutral. Impressive. I assume you've seen combat operations in both conventional and special operations contexts. Martinez puffed out his chest. More than you ever will, sweetheart. I've been shot at by real enemies, not whatever imaginary threats they cook up for training exercises. And I suppose those experiences make you an expert on special operations procedures? Sarah asked, more expert than someone who probably learned everything she knows from movies and video games. Martinez shot back, earning another round of appreciative laughter from his audience. Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering his words. That's an interesting perspective, Petty Officer Martinez. Tell me, in your extensive combat experience, how many high-value target extractions have you personally conducted? Martinez's confident expression flickered slightly. Well, that's classified information, not that it's any of your business. Of course. And how many deep reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines lasting more than 48 hours? Look, lady, I don't have to justify my record to someone who, and how many times have you provided direct action support to SEAL teams during maritime interdiction operations? The room had grown quieter now, some of the candidates beginning to sense a shift in the dynamic. Martinez's face was reddening, whether from anger or embarrassment, Sarah couldn't tell. I don't know what game you're playing, Martinez said, his voice rising. But real warriors don't need to play 20 questions to prove themselves. We let our actions speak. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the room, a cold, predatory expression that made several candidates unconsciously step backward. Actions do indeed speak louder than words, Petty Officer Martinez. Which brings me to an interesting question for all of you. She walked around the podium, moving closer to the group of candidates who had been tormenting her for the past 15 minutes. Her voice remained calm and professional, but there was something new in her tone, an edge that cut through their confidence like a blade. If I am, as you suggest, just some inexperienced officer who stumbled into the wrong briefing room, then how exactly do you think I gained access to this facility? How did I obtain classified briefing materials? How do I know the specific details of your training schedule? The questions hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Several candidates exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier confidence beginning to waver. Bradley, still determined to maintain his position as the group's spokesman, stepped forward with forced bravado. Security around here is probably pretty lax. I bet you sweet-talked some lonely guard into letting you play soldier for a day. Or maybe, suggested the burly petty officer, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction, she's some kind of Inspector General Plant, trying to see if we'll respect the chain of command even when it doesn't make sense. Sarah's smile widened slightly. Those are interesting theories. But they raise another question. If I were indeed some kind of inspector or investigator, how do you think your behavior over the past 15 minutes would be reflected in my report? The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning system. For the first time since she had entered the room, Sarah had their complete attention. Let me ask you all something, she continued, her voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of command. What do you think happens to candidates who show disrespect to superior officers, who assume they know better than their chain of command, who let their prejudices override their training and discipline? Martinez attempted to salvage the situation. Look, if you really are who you say you are, then maybe you should have introduced yourself properly instead of playing games. Games. Sarah's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the calm surface. You mean like the game where you assumed my rank and qualifications based on my appearance? The game where you decided I couldn't possibly belong here because I don't fit your preconceptions about what a warrior looks like. She began walking slowly among the candidates, her presence somehow commanding despite her small stature. Or perhaps you mean the game where you thought it was appropriate to mock and dismiss a superior officer without bothering to verify their identity or credentials. The burly petty officer, looking increasingly uncomfortable, tried to offer a weak defense. We didn't expect. Look, you have to admit, this situation is pretty unusual. Unusual how? Sarah's question was sharp and direct. Because I'm a woman? Because I'm Asian? Because I don't look like your mental image of what a Navy officer should be. We didn't mean. Bradley stammered, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. What exactly did you mean? Sarah pressed. When you suggested I fetch coffee. When you implied I wasn't qualified to be in this room. When you questioned whether I was even really in the Navy. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Sarah could see the realization dawning on their faces, the slow, horrible understanding that they had potentially just committed career suicide by insulting and disrespecting what might be a very senior officer. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah said, her voice returning to its professional tone. You're all going to take your seats, and I'm going to complete this briefing. After that, we'll discuss how this incident will be addressed. The candidates began moving toward their chairs with the reluctant compliance of men who had just realized they might be in serious trouble. But before they could settle in, the briefing room door opened with a sharp bang. A Master Chief Petty Officer entered the room, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Behind him came 3 more senior enlisted personnel, all wearing the unmistakable expression of people who had been listening from outside and were not pleased with what they had heard. Attention on deck, the Master Chief bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls like a thunderclap. Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Reaper Morrison's eyes swept across the frozen candidates like a predator evaluating prey. His weathered face bore scars from 3 combat deployments and 22 years of service, and his presence filled the room with an almost tangible sense of danger. Behind him, Senior Chief Rodriguez, Chief Williams, and Chief Thompson maintained their positions, their collective gaze creating a wall of judgment that made the air feel heavy. Morrison's voice, when he spoke, was low and controlled, the kind of tone that experienced warriors used when they were working very hard not to lose their temper. Well, what do we have here? He walked slowly into the room, his combat boots making deliberate sounds against the polished floor. The candidates remained at attention, but Sarah could see sweat beginning to form on several foreheads despite the air conditioning. Candidates, Morrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. It seems we have a problem. A very serious problem. Bradley, still standing at attention but clearly fighting internal panic, ventured a whispered, Master Chief. Did I give you permission to speak, Candidate Bradley? Morrison's question cracked like a whip. No, Master Chief. Then, I suggest you shut your mouth and open your ears, because what I'm about to tell you might save what's left of your pathetic excuse for a military career. Morrison positioned himself in front of Sarah, but instead of looking at her, he addressed the room full of trembling candidates. Gentlemen, I want you to take a very good look at this officer. Study her uniform. Look at her ribbons. Look at her insignia. And Then, I want you to think very carefully about what you've learned during your time in the Navy about making assumptions. Senior Chief Rodriguez stepped forward, his own voice carrying a heavy Brooklyn accent that somehow made his words even more intimidating. Master Chief, permission to enlighten these candidates about exactly who they've been disrespecting? Permission granted, Senior Chief. Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and began reading in the tone of someone delivering a death sentence. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun, serial number 442-5789. Naval Academy, class of 2007. Top 5% of her graduating class. Naval War College graduate with distinction. The candidates' faces were growing paler with each word, but Rodriguez was just getting started. Surface Warfare Officer Qualification, 2008. Destroyer Squadron Command Tour aboard USS Arleigh Burke, 2009 to 2012, during which she participated in anti-piracy operations off Somalia, during which her ship was responsible for capturing or neutralizing 17 pirate vessels without a single friendly casualty. Bradley's knees were visibly shaking now, and Martinez looked like he might vomit. Combat Action Ribbon earned during Iranian fast attack craft interdiction in the Strait of Hormuz, 2011. Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism during the rescue of 23 merchant marine personnel from a sinking vessel under enemy fire. Chief Williams, a massive man with arms covered in tattoos, stepped forward with his own contribution. Tell them about her special operations background, Rodriguez. I was getting to that, Chief. Rodriguez's smile was predatory. Navy SEAL training, graduated first in her class, 2013. Yes, candidates, you heard that correctly. She is a Navy SEAL. Not only that, but she graduated first in a class of 47 candidates, 38 of whom washed out before completion. The sound of someone hyperventilating filled the silence. It was coming from the burly petty officer who had earlier questioned whether Sarah could do a push-up. Chief Thompson, who had remained silent until now, spoke in a gravelly voice that sounded like it had been damaged by sand and gunpowder. Should we tell them about Operation Neptune's Fury, Master Chief? Morrison nodded grimly. Please do, Chief. Thompson's eyes found Martinez, the candidate who had boasted about his 3 deployments. Operation Neptune's Fury, Syria, 2016. Lieutenant Commander Chun led a 6-person team on a deep reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines. Mission duration, 11 days. Objective, locate and gather intelligence on a high-value target believed to be coordinating terrorist activities across 3 countries. The room was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Day 4 of the mission, Thompson continued. The team was compromised by enemy patrol. Instead of aborting the mission, Lieutenant Commander Chun made the tactical decision to neutralize the threat and continue the operation. Her team eliminated 12 enemy combatants without alerting the larger enemy force to their presence. Morrison took over the narrative. Day 7, the team located the target. But instead of just gathering intelligence, they discovered evidence of an imminent attack on a civilian refugee camp housing over 3,000 women and children. Lieutenant Commander Chun made the decision to expand the mission scope. Rodriguez consulted his tablet again. Her team spent 4 additional days tracking enemy movements, identifying weapons caches, and developing a plan to neutralize the threat to the refugee camp. On day 11, they coordinated with Allied forces to conduct a precision strike that eliminated 17 high-value targets and prevented a massacre. Williams stepped closer to the candidates, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. For her actions during Operation Neptune's Fury, Lieutenant Commander Chun was awarded the Silver Star, the Defense Superior Service Medal, and a 2nd Navy Cross. The refugee camp she saved housed 3,247 people, men, women, and children who are alive today, because she chose to extend her mission and put their lives above her own safety. The candidates were no longer just pale. Several were visibly trembling. Bradley looked like he might collapse at any moment. Chief Thompson wasn't finished. Want to know her current assignment, candidates? She's the officer in charge of advanced tactical training for SEAL teams preparing for high-risk operations. In other words, she trains Navy SEALs. She evaluates whether Navy SEALs are ready for the most dangerous missions our country asks them to perform. Morrison's voice rose slightly, cutting through the stunned silence. She has trained over 200 Navy SEALs in advanced combat techniques. 43 of those SEALs have received commendations for extraordinary performance in combat operations using tactics she taught them. 12 are alive today because of specific techniques she developed and taught them. Rodriguez looked up from his tablet. Oh, and candidates? Her current security clearance level is so high that I can't even tell you what it is without violating federal law. She has access to intelligence information that most admiral-level officers will never see. Sarah stood quietly through this recitation of her service record, maintaining her professional composure. She had not asked them to defend her, but she understood why they were doing it. The military was more than a job. It was a brotherhood and sisterhood that protected its own, especially when one of their own had been unfairly attacked. Williams turned his attention to the specific candidates who had been most vocal in their mockery. Petty Officer Martinez, you mentioned your 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Would you like to know how many combat deployments Lieutenant Commander Chin has completed? Martinez's voice was barely a whisper. No, Chief. I think you would. 7 combat deployments. Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, Iraq, and 3 classified locations I can't name. Total time in active combat zones, 43 months. Number of times she has personally been under enemy fire, too many to count. Thompson picked up the thread. Bradley, you suggested that she learned everything from movies and video games. Her personal weapons qualification scores are in the top 1% of all Navy personnel. She holds expert ratings in 13 different weapon systems, including several that most people in this room have never even heard of. Morrison's voice turned ice cold. And that burly gentleman there who questioned whether she could do a push-up? Lieutenant Commander Chun holds the current Navy record for the combat fitness assessment for her age and gender. She can outrun, outswim, and probably outfight every single one of you pathetic excuses for future SEALs. The Master Chief began walking among the candidates, stopping in front of each one who had participated in the mockery. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than shouting. But here's what really makes me angry, candidates. It's not that you disrespected a superior officer, though that alone would be enough to end your careers. It's not even that you made assumptions based on her appearance, though that shows a level of ignorance that frankly disgusts me. He stopped in front of Bradley, staring directly into his eyes from inches away. What makes me angry is that you had the opportunity to learn from one of the most decorated and experienced special operations officers in the Navy, and instead of showing respect and trying to absorb everything she could teach you, you chose to mock her and demand coffee. Rodriguez joined Morrison in front of the candidates. Do you have any idea what it means to have Lieutenant Commander Chin personally conduct your training briefing? Do you understand the honor that was being offered to you? Chief Williams shook his head in disgust. There are Navy SEALs with years of experience who would give anything for the chance to learn advanced tactics from her. There are officers twice your age who show her the respect she has earned through blood and sacrifice. And you idiots thought she was lost looking for the gift shop. Thompson's voice was filled with contempt. The worst part is that she was here to help you. This briefing was designed to give you advantages during Hell Week that could mean the difference between success and failure. She was sharing knowledge that could save your lives during actual combat operations. Morrison stepped back and addressed the entire group. Let me make something very clear to all of you. Lieutenant Commander Chun is not just qualified to train Navy SEALs. She is overqualified. She has forgotten more about special operations than most of you will ever learn. The fact that she was willing to spend her time preparing you for success was a gift that you were too stupid and too prejudiced to recognize. Sarah finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. Master Chief Morrison, thank you for your support, but I believe these candidates have learned their lesson. Perhaps we can proceed with the briefing? Morrison turned to face her, and for the first time since entering the room, his expression softened slightly. Ma'am, with respect, I don't think these candidates deserve the benefit of your expertise after the way they've behaved. Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes, Master Chief. These young men made errors in judgment, but they're still training to serve their country. I'd prefer to focus on preparing them for success rather than dwelling on their failures. Rodriguez stepped forward. Ma'am, permission to speak freely? Of course, Senior Chief. These candidates just spent 15 minutes insulting and demeaning a decorated war hero. They questioned your authority, your credentials, and your right to be in this room. They suggested you were playing dress-up and asked you to fetch coffee. With respect, ma'am, that's not a mistake. That's a character flaw that could get people killed in operational environments. Williams nodded grimly. Senior Chief Rodriguez is right, ma'am. If these candidates can't recognize and respect legitimate authority when it's standing right in front of them, how can they be trusted to follow orders during life or death situations? Thompson added his own perspective. Ma'am, we've all seen what happens when people in special operations environments let their prejudices override their judgment. It gets good people killed. These candidates have demonstrated that they're not ready for that level of responsibility. Morrison's expression was stone cold as he addressed Sarah directly. Ma'am, you have shown these candidates more patience and professionalism than they deserve. But I have to ask, do you really want to waste your valuable time training people who fundamentally don't respect you or the institution you represent? Sarah looked around the room at the candidates, all still standing at rigid attention, their faces pale with fear and dawning realization of the magnitude of their error. She could see genuine remorse in some faces, stubborn pride in others, and confusion in most. Master Chief, she said finally, what I want is for these candidates to succeed. Not Sarah's voice filled the silent briefing room with the authority of someone who had commanded troops under fire and made life or death decisions in the darkest corners of the world. Candidates, what happened here today represents a failure of the most basic military principle, the assumption that your first impression is your only impression, and that your prejudices are more reliable than your training. She began walking slowly in front of the formation, her hands clasped behind her back in the classic military position. The Master Chief and his team remained at attention behind the candidates, their presence a constant reminder of the gravity of the situation. Each of you entered this room with preconceived notions about what a Navy SEAL looks like, what a combat veteran looks like, what a qualified military officer looks like. When I didn't match those expectations, you allowed your assumptions to override your discipline and your respect for the chain of command. Bradley, still standing at rigid attention but sweating profusely, opened his mouth as if to speak, but Sarah's sharp glance silenced him immediately. The first rule of special operations is that things are rarely what they appear to be. The second rule is that underestimating your opposition or your allies can get you killed. Today, you violated both of those rules. She stopped in front of Martinez, who had boasted about his combat experience. Petty Officer Martinez, you mentioned your 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Tell me, during those deployments, how many times did you encounter enemy forces that didn't look like what you expected? Martinez's voice was barely audible. Several times, ma'am. Elaborate. We encountered female combatants who appeared to be civilians. Young men who looked like farmers, but were carrying IEDs. Elderly people who turned out to be intelligence assets. And what did your training teach you about making assumptions in those situations? That assumptions get people killed, ma'am. Sarah nodded. Correct. Yet today, in a controlled environment surrounded by your fellow service members, you immediately abandoned that training and made assumptions based on nothing more than my physical appearance. She moved to stand in front of the burly petty officer who had questioned her physical fitness. What's your name, candidate? Petty Officer First Class Thompson, ma'am. Not the chief, you. The candidate. Petty Officer First Class Duncan, ma'am. Petty Officer Duncan, you suggested that I probably couldn't do a push-up. Can you do a push-up, Duncan? Yes, ma'am. How many can you do in 2 minutes? Duncan's voice wavered slightly. 78, ma'am. Sarah smiled coldly. Interesting. My last recorded score was 92. But, more importantly, Duncan, how many push-ups can you do while under enemy fire? How many can you do after 48 hours without sleep while carrying 60 pounds of gear through enemy territory? Duncan's face was growing red. I don't know, ma'am. I do know because I've done it. Multiple times. In multiple combat zones. While leading teams of men who initially had the same doubts about my capabilities that you expressed today. Chief Williams stepped forward from his position behind the candidates. Ma'am, permission to share Petty Officer Duncan's training scores. Please do, Chief. Williams consulted a tablet. Petty Officer Duncan currently ranks 14th out of 26 candidates in physical fitness assessments, 19th in weapons qualifications, and 22nd in tactical decision-making exercises. Sarah's voice remained level. So, Duncan, you question the physical capabilities of an officer who outperforms you in every measurable category, based solely on the fact that she doesn't look like what you think a warrior should look like. Duncan's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, ma'am. And what does that tell you about your readiness to make critical judgments in operational environments? That I'm not ready, ma'am. Sarah moved on to Bradley, who was visibly trembling. Ensign Bradley, you asked me to fetch coffee for the group. In your military experience, is it appropriate for junior officers to give orders to senior officers? No, ma'am. Is it appropriate for junior officers to assume that senior officers are lying about their rank and qualifications? No, ma'am. Is it appropriate for junior officers to suggest that senior officers are wearing fake uniforms or fake identification? Bradley's voice cracked. No, ma'am. Senior Chief Rodriguez stepped forward. Ma'am, Ensign Bradley's academic scores show him ranked third in his class at the Naval Academy, with particular strength in leadership and military protocol, which makes his behavior today even more inexcusable. Sarah nodded. So Bradley, despite having received extensive education in military courtesy and protocol, despite knowing the proper procedures for addressing superior officers, despite understanding the importance of the chain of command, you chose to ignore all of that training because I didn't match your mental image of what a commander should look like. Yes, ma'am. I have no excuse, ma'am. Sarah's voice hardened. You're right, Bradley. You have no excuse. And, in a real operational environment, that kind of failure to recognize legitimate authority could result in mission failure, loss of life, and international incidents. She addressed the entire group again, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. Every single one of you will face situations in your military career where you must quickly assess people, situations, and threats based on limited information. Your ability to look beyond surface appearances and identify the reality beneath could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Master Chief Morrison stepped forward. Ma'am, would you like to share some examples from your operational experience? Sarah considered for a moment, then nodded. Operation Sandstorm, Iraq, 2014. My team was tasked with identifying and apprehending a high-value target known to be operating in a small village near Fallujah. Intelligence suggested the target was a middle-aged man with a distinctive beard and traditional clothing. The candidates were listening intently now, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine attention. We spent 3 days conducting surveillance, looking for someone who matched the description. On the 4th day, we identified what appeared to be our target, a man who perfectly fit the intelligence profile. We were preparing to move when I noticed something that didn't feel right. She paused, letting the tension build. There was a young woman in the village, probably early 20s, who seemed to be everywhere we needed to be. She appeared at the market when we were setting up surveillance. She was near the mosque when we were monitoring radio traffic. She was walking past our observation post at regular intervals. Chief Thompson nodded approvingly. Ma'am was demonstrating proper operational awareness. My team thought I was being paranoid, Sarah continued. The woman looked like a typical village resident, traditional clothing, appeared to be shopping for her family, carried herself like someone who belonged there. She didn't match any intelligence profiles, didn't appear on any watch lists, and seemed completely harmless. Martinez, despite his earlier humiliation, found himself genuinely curious. What did you do, ma'am? I made the decision to delay our mission and conduct additional surveillance on the woman. My team thought I was wasting time and resources chasing shadows while our real target was right in front of us. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Tell them what you found, ma'am. 48 hours of careful observation revealed that the young woman was actually the operational commander for the entire terrorist cell in that region. The middle-aged man who matched our intelligence profile was a decoy, a local farmer who had been paid to dress and act like the target to draw attention away from the real threat. The briefing room was completely silent except for the sound of air conditioning and the occasional gulp from nervous candidates. The woman was responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces, had planned the bombing of 2 coalition convoys, and was in the process of organizing a coordinated assault on a nearby forward operating base that housed over 300 Allied personnel. Williams added his own commentary. Ma'am's decision to trust her instincts instead of accepting surface appearances saved hundreds of lives and led to the capture of one of the most wanted terrorist operatives in the region. Sarah's voice took on a sharper edge. If I had made the same mistake you made today, if I had assumed that a young woman couldn't possibly be a dangerous enemy because she didn't look like what I expected a terrorist commander to look like, 300 soldiers would have died in that attack. The weight of her words settled over the candidates like a physical presence. Bradley looked like he might be sick. The point, candidates, is that your assumptions are not just wrong, they're dangerous. They're dangerous to you, they're dangerous to your teammates, and they're dangerous to the mission. Chief Thompson stepped forward. Ma'am, should we discuss Operation Desert Eagle? Sarah's expression grew more serious. Operation Desert Eagle involved a situation where assumptions about gender roles and capabilities led to mission failure and loss of life. Are you sure you want to hear about it, candidates? Every head nodded, despite their obvious discomfort. Syria, 2017. A joint operation with Allied forces to rescue hostages being held by a terrorist organization. The intelligence indicated that the hostages were being guarded by a small group of male combatants in a compound outside Aleppo. She began walking again, her footsteps marking time like a metronome. The Allied team consisted of 12 operators, all male, all with extensive special operations experience. They had trained together for weeks, developed detailed assault plans, and were confident in their ability to execute the mission successfully. Morrison's face was grim as he listened to the familiar story. What the intelligence failed to mention, and what the assault team failed to consider, was that the terrorist organization in that region routinely used female operatives for compound security. Not as support personnel, not as lookouts, but as fully trained combatants with automatic weapons and explosive devices. Sarah's voice grew quieter, forcing the candidates to strain to hear her. When the assault team breached the compound, they encountered resistance that they weren't prepared for. They had trained to fight men, planned to fight men, and when they found themselves facing armed women, they hesitated. For just a moment, their training was overcome by their assumptions about what women could and couldn't do in combat. The silence in the room was absolute. That moment of hesitation cost them the element of surprise. 2 operators were killed, 4 were wounded, and the mission failed. The hostages were moved to another location before a second rescue attempt could be organized. Rodriguez's voice was heavy with emotion. 3 of the hostages died in captivity before they could be rescued by a follow-up operation 6 weeks later. Sarah stopped walking and faced the candidates directly. Those deaths were caused by the same kind of thinking you demonstrated today. The assumption that people who don't look like what you expect can't possibly be what they appear to be. Duncan's voice was barely audible. Ma'am, were you part of the follow-up operation? Sarah's smile was cold and predatory. I planned and led the follow-up operation. We successfully rescued all remaining hostages with 0 friendly casualties. The difference was that my team was trained to expect the unexpected and to never, ever make assumptions based on appearance. She let that information sink in before continuing. The lesson, candidates, is that you, Sarah, moved to the projection screen and activated her laptop, displaying a tactical map of a compound surrounded by detailed annotations and operational notes. The image was clearly from an actual mission briefing, complete with satellite photography and intelligence assessments. This is the compound where we conducted Operation Desert Eagle's follow-up mission, she said, using a laser pointer to highlight specific areas. I want you to study this image and tell me what you see. The candidates, still at attention, strained to examine the details on the screen. Bradley was the first to speak, his voice cautious and respectful now. Ma'am, I see a fortified compound with multiple buildings, what appears to be guard positions, and several vehicles. Good. What else? Martinez added. There appear to be multiple entry points, ma'am, but they're all heavily defended. Correct. Duncan, what do you notice about the personnel visible in this satellite imagery? Duncan studied the screen carefully. Ma'am, I can see several figures, but I can't determine their gender or age from this altitude. Sarah's voice carried a note of approval. Exactly right, Duncan. This is what real intelligence looks like. You get fragments of information, shadows, and shapes, incomplete data that you have to piece together into actionable plans. You don't get detailed profiles that match your expectations. She clicked to the next slide, showing a closer view of the compound with additional tactical markings. Now, based on the failed first mission, what assumptions do you think we avoided during our planning phase? The candidates exchanged glances, clearly struggling with the shift from being humiliated to being asked to participate in tactical analysis. Rodriguez stepped forward. Answer the officer's question, candidates. This is your chance to demonstrate that you're capable of learning. Bradley cleared his throat nervously. Ma'am, I think you avoided assuming that all the combatants would be male. Correct. What else? Martinez added. You avoided assuming that traditional gender roles would apply in a combat environment. Good. Continue. Duncan, gaining confidence, said, you plan for the possibility that the enemy might not look like what our training typically prepares us to fight against. Sarah nodded approvingly. All correct. But we went further than that. Chief Thompson, would you explain our personnel selection for this mission? Thompson stepped forward, consulting his own notes. Ma'am selected a team that included both male and female operators, with specific emphasis on operators who had experience fighting diverse enemy forces in unconventional environments. Why was that important? Sarah asked the candidates. This time, they were more eager to respond, sensing an opportunity to redeem themselves through intelligent participation. Bradley spoke first. Because a diverse team would be less likely to share the same blind spots and assumptions. Because female operators might better understand the tactics and capabilities of female enemies, added Martinez. Duncan concluded, because the team's diversity would mirror the complexity of the threat environment. Sarah smiled. A genuine smile this time, not the cold expression from earlier. Excellent. You're beginning to understand the tactical importance of avoiding assumptions. She clicked to the next slide, showing the mission execution timeline. The rescue operation lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. We encountered resistance from 11 enemy combatants. 7 were male, 4 were female. The female combatants were responsible for the most sophisticated defensive positions and had superior marksmanship skills. Chief Williams added his perspective. The female enemy combatants were also more likely to fight to the death rather than surrender, which required different tactical approaches during the assault. Sarah continued her briefing. If we had made the same assumptions that cost lives during the first mission, if we had hesitated or shown surprise when encountering female combatants, this mission would also have failed. What made the difference, ma'am? Martinez asked, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. Training, preparation, and mental flexibility, Sarah replied. But, most importantly, we approached the mission without preconceived notions about what the enemy would look like or how they would behave. She advanced to the next slide, showing photographs of the rescued hostages, a diverse group of humanitarian workers, journalists, and civilian contractors. These are the people we brought home safely. They're alive today because our team was trained to see reality instead of assumptions, to adapt to unexpected situations, and to respect the capabilities of all combatants regardless of their appearance. Master Chief Morrison stepped forward. Candidates, this is the level of thinking and preparation required for successful special operations. This is why Lieutenant Commander Chen's experience and expertise are so valuable, and why your earlier behavior was so disappointing. Sarah clicked to a new slide showing training photographs of mixed-gender SEAL teams in various operational exercises. Modern special operations require teams that can function effectively in any environment against any enemy. This means overcoming not just physical challenges, but mental and cultural challenges as well. She pointed to a photograph showing female operators rappelling from helicopters alongside their male counterparts. These women have completed the same training you're going through now. They've met the same physical standards, passed the same tests, and demonstrated the same commitment to excellence, Rodriguez added. And some of them have combat experience that would make your Afghanistan deployments look like training exercises. Sarah's voice took on a more personal tone. When I went through SEAL training, I faced the same skepticism and doubt that you expressed today. My instructors questioned whether I belonged there. My fellow candidates assumed I would wash out during the first week. The candidates were listening intently now, their earlier hostility completely replaced by focused attention. But I didn't wash out. I didn't quit. I didn't ask for special treatment or modified standards. I met every challenge, passed every test, and graduated first in my class not because of my gender, but despite the assumptions people made about my gender. Bradley found the courage to ask, "Ma'am, what kept you going when people doubted you?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. The knowledge that lives would depend on my competence. The understanding that my teammates needed to trust me completely, and that trust had to be earned through demonstrated capability, not demanded because of rank or position. She clicked to another slide showing a group photograph of her graduating SEAL class. In the image, she stood among 46 other graduates, barely visible among the much larger men, but wearing the same proud expression as everyone else. This photograph was taken on graduation day. Every person in this image earned their place through months of the most demanding training the military has to offer. We survived Hell Week together, completed underwater demolitions training together, and learned to trust each other with our lives. Chief Thompson's voice carried a note of pride. 18 of the people in that photograph went on to receive combat decorations. 4 received Purple Hearts. 2 gave their lives in service to their country. Sarah's voice grew quieter, and every single one of them learned to look past surface appearances and judge people based on their actions and capabilities rather than their preconceptions. She turned off the projector and faced the candidates directly. Which brings us back to today's lesson. You had the opportunity to learn from someone with extensive special operations experience. Instead of taking advantage of that opportunity, you chose to mock and dismiss me based on your assumptions. Morrison's voice cut through the silence. The question now is what you're going to do with this learning experience. Sarah nodded. Master Chief Morrison is correct. You have a choice to make. You can continue carrying the same prejudices and assumptions that led to today's embarrassment, or you can use this experience to become better warriors and better leaders. She began walking among the candidates again, but this time her demeanor was that of an instructor rather than a disciplinarian. If you choose to learn from this experience, you'll find that questioning your assumptions makes you more effective in every aspect of military operations. You'll be better at gathering intelligence, better at assessing threats, better at working with diverse teams, and better at adapting to unexpected situations. Rodriguez stepped forward. Ma'am, what specific changes should these candidates make in their thinking and behavior? Sarah considered the question carefully. First, they need to understand that competence and capability come in many forms. Physical appearance, gender, age, ethnicity, none of these factors determine someone's qualifications or potential contributions. She stopped in front of Martinez. Second, they need to develop intellectual humility, the confidence to trust their training while remaining open to new information and different perspectives. Moving to Duncan, she continued. Third, they need to understand that respect for the chain of command isn't just about following orders. It's about recognizing that authority and expertise can come from unexpected sources. Finally, stopping in front of Bradley, she concluded. And fourth, they need to develop the mental flexibility that allows them to question their own assumptions and adapt their thinking based on evidence rather than prejudice. Chief Williams stepped forward. Ma'am, these are the same qualities that separate successful special operations personnel from those who wash out during training. Sarah nodded. Exactly right, Chief. The physical challenges of SEAL training are significant, but they're not the primary reason people fail. Most people fail because they can't adapt their thinking, can't work effectively with diverse teams, or can't function when reality doesn't match their expectations. She addressed the entire group again. The enemies you'll face in your military careers won't conform to your expectations. They'll use tactics you weren't trained for, come from directions you don't expect, and look like people you wouldn't normally consider threats. Morrison added his own perspective. Your teammates won't always look like what you think a warrior should look like either. You'll work with people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different experiences. Your success will depend on your ability to recognize and utilize everyone's strengths. Sarah clicked through several more slides showing diverse military units in various operational environments, integrated teams working in desert, jungle, urban, and maritime settings. These images represent the future of special operations. Mixed-gender teams, multinational coalitions, operations requiring cultural understanding, and linguistic capabilities that no single demographic group can provide. Thompson pointed to one particularly striking image showing a female operator providing medical treatment to wounded civilians while male team members secured the perimeter. This photograph was taken during a humanitarian mission in South Sudan. The female medic in this image saved 12 lives during a single operation, including 3 enemy combatants who later provided crucial intelligence. Rodriguez added, the male operators in this image later credited her Medi the 30 seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. The candidates remained at rigid attention, but Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out on their faces. Some showed genuine remorse and determination, while others displayed the stubborn resistance of people forced to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Bradley was the first to speak, his voice steady despite the obvious effort it required. Ma'am, I request permission to continue training. I understand that my behavior today was inexcusable and demonstrated poor judgment that could be dangerous in operational environments. I commit to examining and correcting my assumptions and prejudices. Martinez followed immediately. Ma'am, I also request permission to continue. I realize that my combat experience made me overconfident and blind to my own limitations. I want to learn from someone with your level of expertise and experience. Duncan's response came after a longer pause. Ma'am, I was wrong about everything today. I let my preconceptions override my training and my basic respect for the chain of command. I understand if you decide I'm not suitable for SEAL training, but if you'll give me another chance, I'll prove that I can learn from this mistake. Sarah looked at each candidate in turn, evaluating their sincerity and potential for growth. The other candidates who had participated in the mockery offered similar apologies and commitments to change their thinking. Master Chief Morrison stepped forward. Ma'am, your assessment? Sarah considered her response carefully. Master Chief, these candidates demonstrated poor judgment and inappropriate behavior. However, they also demonstrated the ability to listen, learn, and adapt when confronted with new information. That adaptability is crucial for special operations. She moved closer to the candidates, her voice taking on the tone of a senior leader making an important decision. Gentlemen, I'm going to give you an opportunity to prove that you've learned from this experience. But understand that this opportunity comes with conditions. Rodriguez stepped forward with a tablet. Ma'am, shall I document the conditions for the record? Please do, Senior Chief. Sarah's voice became formal and official. Condition 1. Each candidate will submit a written analysis of today's events, including specific identification of the assumptions they made, why those assumptions were dangerous, and what they will do differently in the future. She paused while Rodriguez typed, then continued. Condition 2. Each candidate will research and present a case study of a historical military operation where assumptions about enemy capabilities or friendly force limitations led to mission failure or unnecessary casualties. Chief Williams nodded approvingly as Sarah outlined the third condition. Condition 3. During the remaining training exercises, these candidates will be evaluated not just on their individual performance, but on their ability to work effectively with diverse team members and adapt to unexpected situations. Thompson stepped forward. Ma'am, what about ongoing assessment of their attitude and thinking? Sarah smiled grimly. Condition 4. Each candidate will be assigned a mentor from the senior enlisted staff who will evaluate their progress in overcoming prejudicial thinking and developing the intellectual flexibility required for special operations. Morrison's expression showed satisfaction with these requirements. Ma'am, those are appropriate conditions. What happens if they fail to meet these standards? If any candidate demonstrates continued prejudicial thinking, inability to adapt to diverse team environments, or unwillingness to question their own assumptions, they will be immediately removed from SEAL training and reassigned to conventional forces. The weight of this ultimatum settled over the candidates like a physical presence. They understood that they were being given a second chance, but it was a conditional second chance that could be revoked at any moment. Sarah addressed the candidates directly. Understand that this is not just about political correctness or social sensitivity. This is about operational effectiveness and mission success. Modern special operations require mental flexibility, cultural awareness, and the ability to work with anyone, anywhere, under any circumstances. She clicked to a new slide showing a complex organizational chart of a modern special operations task force. Look at this structure. You see conventional forces, special operations personnel, intelligence specialists, cultural advisors, female engagement teams, civil affairs units, psychological operations specialists, and liaison officers from multiple allied nations. Chief Thompson pointed to specific elements of the chart. In a typical deployment, these candidates will work with personnel from dozens of different military occupational specialties, multiple branches of service, various allied militaries, and civilian agencies from several countries. Rodriguez added his perspective. They'll encounter cultural situations where their American military training has to be adapted to work with local customs, religious practices, and social structures that may be completely foreign to their experience. Sarah's voice emphasized the practical implications. Your success in that environment will depend entirely on your ability to recognize the value and capabilities of people who don't look like you, don't think like you, and don't share your background or experiences. She advanced to another slide showing photographs from actual multinational operations, diverse teams of military personnel working in various cultural contexts around the world. This photograph was taken during a joint operation in Mali. The team included American Navy SEALs, French Foreign Legion paratroopers, British SAS operators, and local military units. The mission's success depended on everyone's ability to work together despite significant differences in training, culture, and language. Morrison stepped closer to the candidates. Tell me, candidates, how do you think the kind of thinking you displayed today would have affected that mission's outcome? Bradley answered immediately. It would have been disastrous, Master Chief. If we had made assumptions about our allies' capabilities based on their appearance or background, we couldn't have worked effectively as a team. Martinez added, we would have missed opportunities to learn from their expertise and might have insulted or alienated people whose cooperation was essential for mission success. Duncan concluded, our prejudices would have become a liability that could have gotten people killed. Sarah nodded approvingly. Correct. Now apply that same thinking to working with female military personnel, personnel from different ethnic backgrounds, personnel with different religious beliefs, and personnel with different types of military experience. She clicked to another slide showing mixed-gender teams in various training scenarios. These operators trained together, deployed together, and fought together. Their effectiveness came from their ability to focus on each other's capabilities rather than their differences. Chief Williams shared a personal anecdote. I deployed to Afghanistan with a female intelligence officer who spoke fluent Pashto and had a PhD in Middle Eastern studies. Some of the conventional forces initially questioned whether she belonged in a combat zone. Thompson picked up the story. 3 months into the deployment, her cultural knowledge and language skills prevented what could have been a major international incident when our unit accidentally violated local religious customs during a village search. Rodriguez concluded, her expertise and quick thinking saved the mission, preserved our relationship with local allies, and probably prevented several American deaths. But if we had listened to the people who thought she didn't belong there, we never would have had access to her capabilities. Sarah used these examples to drive home her central point. This is why intellectual humility and mental flexibility aren't just nice ideas. They're operational necessities. The military can't afford to waste talent because of prejudice, and you can't afford to ignore valuable resources because they don't match your expectations. She moved to the front of the room and addressed the candidates with the authority of someone who had proven her points through years of successful operations. Gentlemen, you're about to begin the most challenging phase of your military training. Hell Week will test your physical endurance, mental toughness, and ability to function as a team under extreme stress. But the real test, the test that will determine your success not just in training but throughout your military careers, is whether you can develop the wisdom to look beyond surface appearances and recognize reality. Master Chief Morrison stepped forward for his final comments. Candidates, you've been given an extraordinary opportunity today. You've learned from one of the most experienced and decorated special operations officers in the Navy. More importantly, you've learned something about yourselves and the limitations of your own thinking. Sarah's voice took on a more personal tone as she prepared to conclude the briefing. I want you to understand that what happened here today isn't unique. Every military unit, every special operations team, every combat deployment involves people learning to work together despite their differences and initial prejudices. She clicked through a final series of slides showing various diverse military units in successful operations around the world. These images represent thousands of successful missions conducted by people who learned to value capability over appearance, expertise over expectations, and results over preconceptions. Chief Thompson added his final observation. The operators in these photographs didn't start out free of prejudice or assumptions. They learned, through training and experience, to recognize and overcome their biases in order to become more effective warriors. Rodriguez emphasized the ongoing nature of this development. This isn't something you master once and forget about. It's an ongoing process of questioning your assumptions, staying open to new information, and constantly working to expand your understanding of what's possible. Sarah moved to stand directly in front of the candidates for her concluding remarks. Today you learned that your assumptions can be wrong, that your prejudices can be dangerous, and that respect and authority come in many different forms. Those are valuable lessons that will serve you well throughout your military careers. Her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction as she delivered her final message. But the most important lesson is this: your effectiveness as warriors, leaders, and human beings will be determined not by your ability to confirm your existing beliefs, but by your willingness to challenge them, question them, and change them when evidence shows they're wrong. Master Chief Morrison called the candidates to attention one final time. Candidates, you will report to your assigned mentors at 0800 tomorrow morning to begin your remedial training in cultural awareness and intellectual flexibility. Your written assignments are due in 72 hours. Your case study presentations will be scheduled over the next week. Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave, but before reaching the door, she turned back to address the candidates one last time. Gentlemen, I hope that someday you'll have the opportunity to serve under truly diverse leadership and alongside teammates who challenge your assumptions and expand your capabilities. When that happens, remember today's lesson and embrace the opportunity to become better warriors and better people. As she walked toward the exit, Bradley called out, "Ma'am?" Sarah stopped and turned back. "Yes, Ensign. Ma'am, thank you for giving us a second chance. And thank you for the lesson. We'll do better." Sarah's expression softened into the first genuinely warm smile she had shown all day. "I believe you will, Bradley. I believe you all will. That's why you're here, because you have the potential to become exceptional warriors. Today was just the beginning of realizing that potential." Master Chief Morrison followed her toward the door, then turned back to the candidates one final time. "Candidates, you just spent the morning with one of the finest officers I've ever had the privilege to serve with. Consider yourselves fortunate to have learned from her expertise, and even more fortunate to have learned from your own mistakes." As Sarah left the briefing room, she could hear Morrison beginning the actual tactical briefing for the candidates' final training exercise. The professional, respectful attention they paid to his every word stood in stark contrast to their behavior just 2 hours earlier. Walking down the hallway toward her office, Sarah reflected on the morning's events. The candidates had made serious errors in judgment, but they had also demonstrated the capacity to learn and grow, qualities that were essential for success in special operations. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Admiral Richardson, the Naval Special Warfare Command commanding officer. "Heard about this morning's training evolution. Well done. Those candidates are lucky to have learned from the best." Sarah smiled and typed back, "Just doing my job, sir. These young warriors have tremendous potential. Sometimes they just need help seeing past their own limitations." As she settled into her office to prepare for the afternoon's advanced tactical training session with a group of experienced SEAL teams, Sarah felt satisfied that she had turned what could have been a purely negative experience into a valuable learning opportunity. The candidates who had mocked her that morning would graduate from Hell Week with more than just physical toughness. They would carry with them the intellectual flexibility and respect for diversity that would make them truly effective special operations personnel. The lesson had been painful for them, but it was a lesson that could save lives, both their own and those of the people they would someday be called upon to protect and serve alongside. In the end, that made the morning's difficult confrontation entirely worthwhile. Cal's skills and cultural sensitivity with turning a potentially hostile village into an intelligence asset that supported operations for 6 months. Sarah's voice took on the tone of a senior leader providing guidance to junior personnel. This is why your assumptions aren't just wrong, they're counterproductive. When you prejudge people's capabilities, you limit your own effectiveness and potentially compromise mission success. She looked each candidate in the eye as she spoke. The question you need to ask yourselves is whether you're going to continue limiting your effectiveness through prejudice, or whether you're going to develop the mental flexibility and intellectual humility required for success in modern special operations. Master Chief Morrison stepped forward for what felt like a final judgment. Candidates, you have exactly 30 seconds to decide whether you're ready to continue with this training with the proper attitude and mindset, or whether you need to reconsider your career goals. The silence that followed was the longest 30 seconds any of them had ever experienced. Our prejudices and assumptions aren't just insulting, they're deadly. In special operations, the enemy looks like everyone and no one. Threats come from directions you don't expect, from people who don't fit your preconceptions, in ways that your assumptions tell you are impossible. Master Chief Morrison stepped forward again. Ma'am, these candidates still have an opportunity to learn from this experience, but only if they truly understand the magnitude of their error. Sarah nodded. Master Chief Morrison is correct. What happened here today was not just a breach of military courtesy. It was a demonstration that you are not ready for special operations assignments because you cannot recognize reality when it's standing directly in front of you. She moved closer to the formation, her voice taking on the intensity of a combat commander addressing troops before a dangerous mission. The question now is whether you're capable of learning from this experience, or whether you're going to continue making the same deadly mistakes that have gotten good people killed throughout military history, because they deserve it after their behavior today, but because our country needs them to succeed. The enemy doesn't care about our personal feelings or our mistakes. They only care about our effectiveness as warriors. Morrison studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. But effectiveness requires discipline, and discipline requires respect for the chain of command. I agree completely, Sarah replied, which is why I think this situation presents an excellent teaching opportunity. She walked to the front of the room and turned to face the candidates, her voice taking on the tone of command that had been earned through years of leading troops in combat. Candidates, you will remain at attention while I explain exactly what just happened here and what it means for your future in the Navy. Every candidate in the room snapped to attention so quickly that several nearly lost their balance. The transformation was instantaneous and complete, from a group of cocky trainees making jokes to a formation of rigid statues facing forward with military precision. But Sarah noticed something else, something that made her heart rate quicken and her breath catch in her throat. As the Master Chief and his team entered the room, she caught sight of something that changed everything. On the Master Chief's uniform, barely visible beneath his camouflage blouse, was the unmistakable outline of a trident pin, the golden symbol of a Navy SEAL. And he wasn't alone. The 3 men with him wore the same insignia, their bearing and demeanor marking them as elite warriors who had earned their place through blood, sweat, and unimaginable hardship. These weren't just any senior enlisted personnel. These were Navy SEALs, real ones, with combat experience and decorations that told stories of courage under fire. And from the way they were looking at the candidates, it was clear they had heard every word of the past 15 minutes.